Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks very much indeed for joining us tonight. We're really grateful that you're here. We're, just to make sure you're in the right place, we're thinking about overcoming anxiety tonight. And we're going to be thinking a lot about that over the course, I guess, of the next hour. So thanks very much indeed for tuning in. Let me just tell you who we are. We're Knighton Free Church, just a group of Christians from Leicester in England, and we've found in Jesus Christ many of the answers that we've been searching for. Some of our members at the moment will be at the hospitals, the 3 hospitals in Leicester. Others will be working in care homes. And if you're just tuning in, I know some of you tune in your breaks and actually time your breaks around this kind of thing. Welcome. It's great to have you with us. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, and thanks for what you're doing. We're thinking of you guys very much, and we're really grateful for all you're doing. I guess we're very aware of the importance of good mental health. It's one of the things that our society thinks about quite a bit, and we do as well at Knighton. And we were planning on having a bit of an event where we were going to invite this guy down from Sunderland all the way down to Leicester to come and join us for, I don't know, a weekend and do a little bit of teaching. And one of the great things about all the side effects of this kind of lockdown at the moment is that you can draw near to people very quickly. And so we thought, why not? We'll get him down in the future so we can see him kind of in the flesh. But why not before that get him to come and join us kind of live on one of these live streams that we have. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to Dave Burke. But before we do that, let me just say our plan for tonight. Dave wants to make this as interactive as possible. So we'd love you to ask questions, and you can start doing that now if you want. There are 2 ways to do it. You can ask it on the kind of the comments section right here in YouTube, or I've put an address to slido.com, and if you just go into Slido and you put in that number 84609, then you can ask all sorts of questions in there, and we got some questions already coming online, which is great. Our plan is to do this for the next few weeks, actually, try and get Dave back and do a little bit more. And so kind of over to you. If Dave was going to be talking about another aspect of mental health, what would you get him to talk about? Why don't you, again, drop some ideas in there, and we'll see if we can persuade him to come back and talk a little bit about those things. Well, I'm going to try and hopefully find Dave somewhere out there in Zoom land. There he is.
Hi, Andy. You all right?
Dave, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, I know who you are because I used to work with you years ago. And I guess a number of people who are following this live stream will also know who you are, but many people won't. So could you give us a bit of a kind of a potted history of Dave Burke? Would that be possible?
Okay. Yeah. Well, a big shout out to the people that I do know. It's great to be here, and I'm really sad that I can't see you, but maybe one day. Yeah, I grew up in Sunderland. I live in my hometown. I left 18 to go to university. I studied zoology, and then that became animal behavior, with a side order of psychology as well. And for a number of years, I taught psychology summer schools with the Open University. So that kind of, mind you, that was the animal behavior end of psychology. It was the sort of behavior of woodlice rather than this stuff. But it kind of got me going. I've been in Christian ministry for almost 40 years and recently stepped down as pastor of a church in Sunderland. Over that time, mental health has been one of the staples of pastoral care for people. trying to find out more about it, get information and good input from professionals. Did some courses. Recently, I've trained to be a mental health first aid trainer, and I do that now for adults and young people all over the place, really, but as much in churches as I can possibly do. And so I've got a huge interest in this, really, that grew out of a lot of things, but particularly pastoral ministry in church. And our church here, we run what is basically a drop-in crisis centre, and anything can and does come through the door. So suicidal crisis, people in extreme distress with psychotic episodes and stuff. That's kind of more or less daily, weekly for us. So I'm also somebody who engages with this a lot.
So Dave, tell us, I mean, there seem to be kind of different sections to your life. There's kind of the zoology bit, there's the Christian minister bit, and now you're heading at the young old age of whatever into another section, and you're thinking about mental health. How are you doing that? I'm just interested. What do you do? How does that work out?
Well, some years ago, our church here in Sunderland, 6 years ago actually, moved into a new building. And it was a sort of place we've been dreaming of. It used to be Sunderland's teacher training college. So it's an actual campus with actual trees and lawns. It's an amazing place, but slap bang in the middle of the city. And it's right on the border between two of Britain's most deprived wards. We're surrounded by hostels, bedsits, some pretty low rent accommodation, and lots of people who are on the edge of society live around us, and also lots of asylum seekers and refugees, and that's another community. And then, so I started getting interested in thinking I need to formally gear up in some way to help these folks. So I was given a few months off and did a sabbatical, spent some time with people who could help me to understand this better. I did a thing at that time called a mental health first aid course, which helped me to kind of systematize and categorize what I was trying to do. And then as part of that, I actually said to the folks in our church, look, if you've had treatment for anxiety or depression and you'd like to have a structured conversation about it, just let me know. Well, about 1/10 of our congregation offered. So 20 out of 200 said, we've had medical treatment, we've had various therapies, we're Christians, and this has been a struggle for us. And that really kind of turned me on to, made me aware of just how big a problem this is for people who have an active Christian belief. So with respect to outreach and inreach, this became a very important thing. And once I started to talk to people about it, it just got bigger and bigger. It was like, once we'd given people permission as Christians to talk about stuff they felt they shouldn't feel, it was quite a year. So a lot of my knowledge comes from a little bit of training. I wouldn't overblow that. I'm not a professional. A lot of experience, person to person, and talking to the right people, reading some of the right books. So that's me.
You go in then to companies as well as churches, and you kind of teach them what, good mental health, how to look after their mind?
Well, I do a couple of things. I am trained to deliver a course called a mental health first aid course, and there are a number of different manifestations of that. So it can be 4 hours long, it could be a couple of days. And the aim is twofold. One is just to help people understand what mental health is, what good mental health is, and how to nurture it in yourself, but also how to spot problems in others and how to engage with others and have a good conversation with them and point folks in the right direction, say the right things, don't say the wrong things, be good listeners. But also part of this is building a mentally healthy community. And that could be a business. So I've done some work with the fire service in Tyne and Wear. It could be a social enterprise. So I've done a lot of work with children's services in Sunderland, people who run children's homes, social workers, and so on. And but my main mission, I do that to pay the bills, so that I can do this in churches, and so that I can do the same sort of training as I would do in a business in churches, but skewed towards helping people in the Christian community have mentally healthy churches and be geared up to minister to each other and minister to others as well. So that's my new role. I describe myself as a kind of self-supporting pastor. That's what I do. Yeah.
Now, am I right in thinking that, or did I read this on your website, that you can actually offer that first aid training in these times of lockdown?
Yeah, we can do it online.
Through the net.
Yeah. Yes, I've got a couple of courses coming up on the net, one on the 6th of May, the other one on the 13th of May. I can tell folks about that if they're interested. So that would be like 4 hours like this, working together, discussing together, and learning the main elements of how to look after myself, what to call it when things go wrong. Is it anxiety? Is it depression? How to engage with that. But the most important part of that course is how to have a really useful conversation about somebody's mental health. So, Andy, I noticed you've been snapping at everybody recently. What's going on? That kind of conversation.
How
and
did
to
you
do
know?
it well. I'm telepathic.
All right, Dave, I'm going to hand over to you in a minute. You're going to just talk us through a little bit about anxiety, and we're going to come back. Questions coming in already. A few recommendations. Giles Richardson said here, I'd recommend the Anxiety United YouTube channel for anyone interested in or experiencing anxiety. Thanks for that, Giles. Just a question here. Perhaps just before we get you started, what is the difference between being anxious and rightly anxious because you got an exam or I don't know, whatever else it is, and being ill? The difference between those two?
That's a good question. Well, could start with the rightly anxious thing. Anxiety is a perfectly natural, advantage-giving thing for human beings and for many, many other creatures as well. So if you've got an exam, what you need is something to enhance your performance. And the feeling that we get, that feeling of anxiety, is the result of a bunch of hormones swirling around in our system and enabling us to perform well. So you have built-in performance-enhancing drugs called hormones, and they boost your performance. And you want to be anxious. So if you're on the starting blocks of an Olympic 100-meter final, and everybody else is keyed up, but you're not. Of course, you're a Christian. Your heart is full of peace. You're going to come in last because you need the anxiety. And it's the same, if you're walking through Switzerland woods at midnight, alone, lost, and you start to hear wolves howling nearby, that ability to get out of there as fast as you can or swing a club and defend yourself, that's inbuilt. And it's really important. So, but when that goes wrong, for reasons that are still under investigation, really, that fight or flight set of mechanisms happens at times when it is inconvenient for it to happen. So I can't go to the shops because I'm terrified of having a panic attack, making a fool of myself in front of other people, so I stay at home. And the difference is that the anxiety is not helping me to perform, escape, or fight. The anxiety is messing up my life. And there's a sort of continuum. So, you know, at one end, I feel very anxious. I'm waiting to go into an exam, but I'm in control. The anxiety is there, but I'm in control. At the other end, anxiety is completely in control. And I just obey anxiety. And between those two poles, there are varying positions. And some of us oscillate around the middle, where occasionally anxiety is in charge, occasionally I get in charge of that. And for a lot of us who experience low-level anxiety, knowing a few things to help us get that under control is really useful. Does that make sense?
That does. Thank you. That's really good. So take us through this, because I know you've thought about it quite a bit and chat to us a bit about it. And what I love is, Dave, you're very practical, and you're going to give us some help with it as well. So some of us might be watching this feeling, actually, anxiety is our thing. We really do get quite usually anxious. And I know you've got some things to help us. So let me just hand over to you for a few minutes.
Well, I don't want to talk for very long, because I think it's even more useful to bounce off questions. But just to kind of build on that idea of anxiety as a natural thing and a good thing, and then it can become a difficult, unpleasant thing, and then it can become a controlling thing, where everything is really subject to my feelings of anxiety on a particular day. I think the main thing is to say, firstly, if that's you, it would be good, really sensible, to address that anxiety. And there are a number of ways you can do that. Because if you leave anxiety unaddressed, it can become another illness called depression. And we won't talk much about depression tonight, but anxiety and depression often go together. And the feeling among researchers is that anxiety just left long enough is one of the things that can lead to depression. So it's important to deal with. It's important to be aware of in yourself. When is my anxiety becoming controlling? When is it becoming disordering? Ways of getting help, I think, for starters, finding out about it is brilliant. So here's my story, right? I'm 17 years old. I'm in a car with some friends. We're driving down the M1 towards London, and just outside of London, there's a traffic jam, 3 lanes of traffic. We're in the middle lane, and the thought enters my head. I'm in the passenger seat in the front. The thought enters my head, I can't open the car door because the guy next to us is so close. And that became, if this car bursts into flames, I won't be able to get out. And that became, when this car catches fire, I will die. And what happened next for the next few minutes was a completely out of control psychological meltdown. Now, probably a bit like you, Andy, I am a good British grammar school boy. And what do people like us do when we have a meltdown? Well, we just keep a straight face, and the explosions all happen inside. But afterwards, when the feeling subsided, the traffic was moving, I was left wondering, what on earth is this? I'd never heard of a panic attack and wouldn't do so for another couple of decades. But that's basically what this was. If somebody at the time had said, Dave, you've had a panic attack and this is why they happen and this is what to do, that would have been tremendously helpful. As it was some years before I got a hold of that aspect of my life and an understanding of why that had happened in that particular circumstance. I might come back to that later on, but yeah. So knowing something about it, there's even a word for it, bibliotherapy. Get a book or a leaflet and find out. So that anxiety YouTube thing looks interesting, that was mentioned before. But if you Google NHS Northumberland self-help, you'll be taken to a page of self-help guides that NHS Northumberland produce. Absolutely brilliant. You can download them, order 100 if you pay them money, download them free, and they're really, really helpful. And there's something for everybody, from anxiety through to and personality disorders and beyond. So that would be worth having a look at. That's the first thing. And the second thing is if it is disordering, if it is really in charge, go and see a doctor. And we're long past the days when doctors would say, pull yourself together. If your doctor says that, change your GP, go somewhere else, and talk to a doctor. The doctor's not likely to immediately prescribe medication, but will want to spend a bit of time with you, getting to understand what's going on and trying to help you with the right kind of therapy. Don't just go once, go back. Have a relationship with your GP, because it takes sometimes a little time to work out what's going on, and your GP may need a bit more time than just 1 or 2 5-minute, 10-minute conversations. So there's 2 places to go. Of course, you're a Christian, Andy, and so am I. And the Bible says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything with prayer and supplication, make known your requests unto God, and the peace of God that passes all understanding will keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. That's Philippians 4, verse 6 onwards. And that for me is a very big problem verse in the New Testament, because people quote it very slickly. I don't think Paul is talking about an illness called anxiety in those verses. He's talking about the fears that he and others very frequently face. And we do too. When we're in that sort of natural anxious phase, we're under pressure, we're highly stressed, maybe things are against us, people are against us. And Paul is saying, look, learn to approach this with prayer. And we'll come back to this again a little bit later on, but Christian spirituality is incredibly, sorry, that's my dog. Christian spirituality is incredibly therapeutic. So are dogs.
I'm getting anxious, Dave. I'm getting anxious.
Dogs, certainly anxious. So Paul talks about anxiety there. I don't think he's talking about the illness. But anxiety was an important thing in the Old Testament, New Testament world, and in the Bible as a whole. One of my favorite passages is 2 Corinthians 1, chapter 1, where Paul says, we were in the province of Asia, we call it today Turkey. We were under such pressure that we felt that we were under sentence of death. So this was a dangerous, life-threatening pressure. He doesn't name it, but he talks about the kind of level of anxiety where he feels he is going to die. And that's very high pressure stuff. But we're starting to experience, I think, a little bit of the Old Testament, the New Testament world of anxiety, because our society has ground to a halt. We are shut in by a virus that we don't fully understand yet. And we're distancing from one another for the very good reason, to prevent this disease spreading to the vulnerable. But it doesn't just kill the vulnerable. And the economics of this are really scary, even if the virus wasn't there. So I think we kind of re-entered a little bit of what life in the ancient world was like, because our overconfident veneer of being in control has been stripped away. So that's the world that we're in. So yeah, I've got more to say, but let's see if there are any questions that are worth touching on.
Okay, well,
wrap it on.
Thanks, Dave. Do ask some questions in the comments here on Slido if you want, and we'll make sure we ask Dave all of those. Somebody's asking here, how can I best support my wife who's suffering from anxiety? So I guess they're saying I'm not the anxious one, but I'm living with somebody who is very anxious.
Yes. Yes.
How best to support her or him?
I think the first thing is to believe her. Because if you've never experienced anxiety or depression, it's quite hard to imagine what that person is talking about. Why can't that person just be stronger? Why can't they just face this with courage? And the reality is that the landscape of someone's mind is hidden to us unless they tell us what that landscape looks like. And if somebody was, let's say somebody went to Mars, and then we were having a conversation with this person on Mars, and the person on Mars was describing the landscape on Mars. And I said, you wouldn't believe how big these trees are. They're bigger than redwoods at home. And you said, I'm sorry, I just don't believe you. Well, yeah, maybe that's not true, but they're describing something that they see. To make that a more psychological illustration, read memoirs of people who came back from the First World War, who couldn't talk to their families because they would, this is a very well documented thing, they would talk to their families about life in the trenches, and their families would say, no, you're wrong, that can't be true. Despite the fact that the sun had been out there, but they weren't having any. So I think the first thing is believe your wife, believe your husband. And the second thing is become a good listener. Just learn to let your wife, your husband, your friend talk, and show genuine curiosity about what they're experiencing, so that you can start to feel a bit of that. You've got a thing called empathy. It's a bit like the string of a violin. If you play the string of a violin, the other strings of the violin vibrate in resonance with it. You might not hear them, but they're doing so. And there's something in all of us that resonates with someone else's pain. And learn to find that place of empathy and listen. Being listened to is itself therapeutic, really, really helpful. Sometimes I think we are our partner or spouse's best therapist, if we can learn to occupy that place. And the third thing I would say is find out yourself about it, read a bit about it, and become aware of what anxiety is and what is known about it, so that you can, so 3 things.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very helpful. Dave, it's a great question here. What if what I hear Christians say, or what people say at church, causes me anxiety? What do I do then?
Oh boy, yeah. I think a lot of church stuff is psychologically potentially quite harmful. When preachers say, and I've certainly said this, I've certainly said it at night, if you're a Christian, you should be full of joy. Well, hey, well, that is true. But it's interesting how the Bible uses the word joy and not happiness. And sometimes we don't make that distinction. Gleefully, romantically, up here in the sky is not what's being talked about. There's something much deeper, something much more real that doesn't go in suffering. Levels of happiness might go up and down. So I think preachers need to be careful how they say things, and need to be careful how they teach the people who are psychologically in a difficult place. The other thing is that Christians have some hard things to say that are difficult to accept and listen to. We talk about God who is full of love and grace, but he's also angry with sin. He's also intends to judge the world. And those are scary things. And we should be frightened of some things, because that's how we keep safe. That's why in Switzerland Wood a few minutes ago, our hearts were going pitter-pat because of the wolves. That was dangerous. We need to get out of it. So sometimes we need to respond with fear, with faith, and to do what God's asking us to do, because it is important.
Thank you.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's good. Rebecca asked this. She says, I'm quite conscious that the terms anxiety or anxious are used quite a lot today, but I'm not sure it's always helpful. Does it undermine genuine anxiety? How can we use our language better?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? A lot of terms around mental health are used more generally. So I'm a bit OCD, means, you know, I like a tidy desk, and I always wear a tie. But that's not OCD. OCD is a really debilitating manifestation of anxiety, and it is very disruptive for people who suffer from it. And so we can unhelpfully use psychological terms. And I think anxiety is the semantic range of anxiety. Over here, it's a technical term for an illness that a doctor can diagnose according to strict criteria. That's anxiety. Or he might, or she might call it an anxiety disorder, because it's disordering your life. And over here, yeah, you're just a bit worried about something. I'm a bit anxious about that. That's okay, as long as we don't minimize the disorder. But it's good to think about the language you're using. That's really, really helpful, I think.
So would you say don't use terms like OCD when you're just, talking about?
Well, I think people like me would probably answer differently, probably according to our personality. I'm quite a relaxed guy. And if people use those kinds of psychological terms out of place, I'm the last person to jump down someone's throat. But I think it is helpful to think about the language that we use and the context that we use them. The problem is, and I think some people are like this, you become very Puritan in the killjoy sense of that word. I know there's a good sense of that word. Please don't send me hate mail. But you can become very Puritan in the killjoy sense of that word. And you're the sour face in the conversation that's always pulling people up on their vocabulary. So, for example, I don't like the term commit suicide. I think it has old-fashioned connotations. There are other terms we can use, but people slip into that. And I don't think we should be reproving one another all the time. We need to be more compassionate about that. So we need to just ease off a bit with people's language.
Are we becoming more anxious as a generation? Or are we just getting better at being more open about mental health? And I guess that's somebody's question, but I want to throw in one of my own with that, which is, and, I've noticed, and I guess a lot of people do, that for teens and 20s, anxiety is like a big deal. And, probably kind of depressive illnesses as well. It seems to be more prevalent. What is that? Is that we're just talking about it better, or is that kind of there are things that are making us more anxious?
There's a PhD in that for somebody who's listening. That would be a really interesting study. I don't think that's an easy question to answer. Yes, we're talking about it more. And like I found in my congregation, once we started to talk about it, people started to talk about it, and some surprising people started to talk about it, and that was profoundly healthy. I'm old enough to remember the generation that fought World War II. They did not talk about this at all. And I knew two guys who used to wander past our school every day. And you could tell there was something up. And one of the teachers one day said, well, they both got shell shock. And that was all I knew about psychology, that some people got shell shock if they've been in the war, and that was that. But now we're able to talk about a wide range of experiences that can give people the same sorts of phenomena. For me, it was being trapped underground in a cave in Swaledale for the best part of a day, a few months before that incident in the car. What I was experiencing was a result really of a trauma. We can talk about that now. It would have been tremendously helpful to me if we'd been able to talk about it then, but we weren't. So I think that the atmosphere is very healthy. So we're willing to talk, therefore more people are talking. So maybe it is about just permission to talk. But this might be controversial, but I'll shoot it and see what you think, see what people think. I think the generation coming through now, people who are in their 20s, maybe early 30s, 20s, have a completely different set of circumstances to deal with to me and you. And there's a whole battery of things. They reached puberty earlier, quite a bit earlier. They were having to deal with a very sexualized society earlier than I did, or that the same generation 100 years ago had to. 4 years difference roughly in the onset of puberty over that period of 100 years. At the same time, society's become very sexualized, and a number of things that were set are now a matter of personal choice. So for example, if your gender is a matter of personal choice, what do I choose? Okay, the 17-year-old Dave Burke knew nothing about this sort of thing. Breezed through. The 17-year-old now is faced with a whole battery of stuff that they're having to make choices with. They are being pushed relentlessly by government to compete with the Chinese in their maths, English, and science. That's what's happening. It's not about person, it's about competing with the Chinese. And if you don't do well in your SATs, if you don't do well in your GCSEs, if you don't do well in your A-levels, you will be a failure, is the subtext. At the same time, people are having to navigate this gender, sexuality. At the same time, when I was a kid, the guys that gave me a hard time at school, they were history at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, those guys are active all night on the internet. And the bullying environment's changed completely. So I think the world that young people are growing up in now is actually very different. And I'm not surprised. There's a few other things I could add, but I'm not going to in case there's a riot. But I'll stop there.
Just sticking with interesting. Nick McGuire says social media can be a problem for young people. Hateful comments and bullying is what you were saying. It just goes on constantly, doesn't it? You go switch an off button. It's just through the night in some cases. Kirsty's asked a question to do with the kids, but the other way around. So she says, how can parents talk to our children and teens about our mental health problems without scarring our children, but so that they can understand why we're snappy or unable to get out of bed or whatever it is? That's a good question.
That's a brilliant question. That is such a helpful question. I think parents have always got to make that judgment. How much can my child cope with? And we are for our children, their security and their solidity, their foundation. So it's quite important that we we are careful how we talk about our own mental health. But I think we owe it to our kids to be straight with them about why we might be in a particular way. A personal example, when our kids were quite young, and we went off on holiday, I could be really cranky for the first 3 days. I mean, this isn't a very serious issue, but it's just an illustration. And in the end, Kathy said, why don't you go for a walk before we go on holiday? Believe it or not, we wound up in a situation for a number of years where Kathy and the kids would go on holiday and I would walk to where they were staying. Sometimes it would take me 3 days, 3 nights to get there, but I would walk. By the time I got there, my head was in a different place. And I think it was helpful to understand that I needed to cope. But on the other hand, my kids needed a holiday and they needed a dad who was in a reasonable frame of mind. And to say, look, I'm a bit wound up at the moment because I'm worried about a few things. That's all, and it just eats at me a little bit. But don't worry, it's going to be all right. Yeah. We got a great phrase in Sunderland. We say, I'm feeling a bit chewed, pet. Leave us alone for a bit. And that sort of feeling chewed, that thing, I think is a perfect expression of what anxiety can feel like. Be gently honest, but you have to be careful what you say. Of course, you can say more as people get older. And maybe you'll have the kind of relationship with your kids that you can be quite honest with them.
Here's an interesting question. How often is anxiety related to an underlying addictive behavior?
I don't know. Never thought about that. Yeah. I mean, addictions cause all sorts of havoc. And there can be anxieties around being discovered if you have a secret addiction. Anxieties around affording that addiction. So I should think it's a driver, but I've not really thought very much about that. Interesting question. Yeah.
Let's kind of segue towards the second bit for you. I'm interested what you would say to 17-year-old Dave Burke now, who's, I never knew you got trapped underground. So you're trapped underground and then that kind of panic attack in the car and so on. Here's somebody saying, I just became crazy anxious about falling and I tackled it by making myself go out for a walk. Do you think that was the best way to face my fear?
I think all doctors would say, and therapists would say, you shouldn't avoid the thing that makes you anxious. Now, that may mean you need careful exposure to the thing that makes you anxious. So in the aftermath of this, when I realized this ridiculous incident underground had made me feel very fearful, my response to that was to go underground alone and then sit in a chamber with my light switched off. Now that was extreme and stupid, but that's because I'm an extreme, stupid kind of person. That's just ridiculous. So you've got to be careful. But it sounds to me that might not have been a bad thing in that person's case. So whether it's spiders that you are phobic of, or a particular fear which has got itself embedded in your head, it's good to confront that fear, but it's also good to get some help with it as well. So do that, and I would say to start with, gently probe the outsides of your fear, and then try and, with some help if necessary, get on top of it. For years, even when I was at Knighton, actually, if I went to London for a meeting, I took a miner's headlamp in my bag. I needed to know, if I was on the underground, that if the lights went out, I could get out. I don't need to do that now. because my phone has got a light on it, but it doesn't bother me now. So that's the past as far as I'm concerned. But these things are overcomable. You just need to give them a little bit of time.
So, Dave, we've got a little bit of time left. Love to come back and ask some more questions. So if people have got that, do drop them in. But give us, because you've done quite a bit of thinking about how we can kind of overcome some of this stuff.
Yes.
And what it would look like to, I don't know what the opposite of anxious is, but to live a life free from anxiety. How can I do it? If I am a bit of an anxious person,
yeah,
bit of an issue for me, what are the sort of tips you've got for me?
I mentioned a couple already. I mean, one is talk about it with somebody, and it might be the kind of thing that a conversation with a friend will really help you with. It might be that a conversation with a professional will be more helpful. So you could talk to your GP if you don't fancy going to see your GP. Google IAPT, IAPT, improving access to psychological services, Leicester or wherever you happen to live. And it will give you a phone number that you can use to self-refer for some talking therapy around anxiety or depression. So that's a good way forward. But I'd like to suggest quite a different treatment pathway, if I might, because I've just found being a Christian so helpful when it comes to this. And around that time, I wasn't a Christian when this happened, but I became a Christian later. And in the kind of anxious times I've had over the years since, there's this thing in the Bible which the Bible talks about anxiety. It doesn't talk about freedom from anxiety a lot, because it was a high anxiety world, as ours is at the moment. But it does talk about peace in the Old and New Testaments. And the New Testament word peace, eirene in Greek, the content, the filling for that word for the Bible's writers, the New Testament's writers, came from the Old Testament word peace, which everybody knows, shalom, because it's still used as a greeting in Israel, and in the Arab world, salam, and in Farsi, salam, same word. And we don't use that word if a British person says shalom, the chances are they're taking the mick or something, but we don't use that word. But we do have another phrase which I think is quite interesting: all the best. All the best, Andy. If you think about that, take that literally, all the best. That's shalom, all the best. It means wholeness, it means completeness, it means well-being in its richest sense. And that is a promise of the gospel, a promise of the message of Jesus. So Jesus says, my peace I give you, not as the world gives, but my peace I leave with you. And so Jesus talks about a shalom, which is even better than we can achieve by getting some medical help or having a conversation. And it's a shalom that comes through connecting with him, through a relationship with God that's possible with him. And that's important, because I just think that sometimes life can get so scary, you need someone bigger than you to look after you. And there are times in my life when I felt the power of that, when actually inwardly I was melting down. And so and there will be Christians listening to this who are thinking, yeah, I know exactly what he says. And there'll be maybe people who are not Christians listening to this who are thinking, oh, he's talking about his invisible friend. And to those folks, I'd just like to say, look, this works, okay? I'm a Christian because I think it's true. Jesus lived, died, and I think he rose from the dead. I think you can see that in history. It's clear from history. But at a psychological level, this works. So please don't brush it aside. Have a really good look at this. But I'd say something else as well. I'd say, give it a go. Just try it. What can you lose? Talk to God, trust in God. Say, look, don't know if you're there, but if you are there, please help me. Help me to understand. Help me get through this. The God I know is remarkably susceptible to people who talk to him, even when they're not, really sure. So give this a go. So, yeah, there's another treatment pathway.
Thank you.
Interestingly enough, if you look, if you go to the Royal College of Psychiatrists website and search for spirituality, it says some extraordinary flattering things about spirituality on the Royal College of Psychiatrists website, things you wouldn't expect them to say.
So thank you. Thank you very much. Well, guys, I don't know if you've got any more questions just coming in. Well, there are a few here. So somebody is asking, guilt plays a big part in anxiety, feeling guilty about the impact of illness on work, family and friends. How can we help? So somebody's feeling guilty. That kind of plays into this whole anxiety kind of thing. How can we help with that?
Yes. Guilt's interesting because, it is labeled as the root of many, many psychological issues. Personally, I think these issues are more complicated than that. But guilt is part of this. We have a unique ability to condemn ourselves. There's a really fascinating passage in 2 Corinthians again, which this letter where Paul is particularly raw and unguarded about his own inner landscape, where Paul talks about godly sorrow and worldly sorrow, godly guilt and worldly guilt. And it's interesting he makes the distinction because, if I've messed up God's world, which I have, there should be some guilt involved with that, which there is. But the thing about that sort of guilt, Paul says, is it's forgivable and you don't go on feeling guilty because you're healed, you're reconnected with God, you're restored. The other kind of guilt is just the nonsense that goes round and round on your head. And Paul says leads to death. Just pretty dramatic. Doesn't do you any good at all. And there's an awful lot of that sort of ungodly guilt being constantly processed in our heads. And I think it's tremendously helpful to find forgiveness through what Christ has done. And know that the big issues are settled. But all this other stuff that we feel guilty about, to learn a bit about God's grace. And what grace is God's unstinting generosity towards people. And what it also means is that he's not sitting on his throne in heaven thinking, well, I hope he remembers that conversation and I hope she really feels bad about what she did on that occasion and I hope he doesn't do that. He does not want us to feel guilt like that. And I think he would like us to learn to be compassionate towards ourselves when we're beating ourselves up about stuff that we can no longer change or affect, or that might not be real at all. And that's all I think about discovering the intensity of God's love for us. We are loved more than we can imagine. And it's okay. It's going to be okay.
Somebody else is asking, what with this whole anxiety thing, what part does scripture and prayer play in it?
Oh, I think immense, absolutely immense. I think it's absolutely right when we are afraid to talk to God about our fears. this is terrifying. I am afraid. I don't know why I'm afraid. I don't want to be afraid. I feel guilty for being afraid. I shouldn't be like this. I'm letting you down. All those sorts of things. Where do you get that kind of honesty most? You get it in the Psalms. So about a third of the Psalms are around issues around guilt, depression, anxiety, trauma, and David or others who contributed to the Psalms are ruthlessly open about themselves. So have a read of Psalm 6 afterwards. And, you know, I can't sleep. I burst into tears without, you know, I can't stop thinking about death. People are out to get me. I'm totally paranoid. Mind you, they probably were out to get David, but just because they are out to get you doesn't mean you're not paranoid, sort of thing. But there's all the stuff's there in the Psalms, and I think that honesty, openness should be there. And there's some lovely Psalms that I use when I'm particularly troubled. Psalm 131 is, for me, I think, times without number, I've sat down with God somewhere. My heart is not proud. My eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with things too wonderful for me. Okay, all the stuff I can't control, right? That's yours. But I have stilled and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child is my soul within me. And just finding that place of just being with God, knowing he's there, enjoying the fact that you're safe, feeling safe. That's the very special thing. And I think some of the Psalms are real gateways to that. I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? I think that's 121 or 120?
121, yeah.
121, yeah. Those little gems are really, really helpful, and to use them as moments when we draw near to God. There's a lovely verse, be still and know that I am God. And evangelical Christians are useless at that. We're good at the knowing he is God, but we're not good at the being still. And a lot of people enjoy mindfulness, which is, I did a course on mindfulness once and really enjoyed it, because the Buddhist who taught it got really wound up every time we talked about it, because I just felt my sense of the presence of God deepening in meditation. And he insisted that really wasn't meant to be happening. But it seems to me that mindfulness is be still. And that's all. But be still and know that I am God. That's what we've got. And that is so special. So I'm not knocking mindfulness at all. Actually, I think it's really helpful. And learning how to be still is something we all need to do. And it's incredibly helpful. And therapeutic too, yeah.
Dave, we've just come up on an hour. I'm really grateful. Time shot past. This has been a real help for me, actually. Thank you very much. There's a number of things I'm taking away from this, and you've been very honest with us, very open, actually. So thank you for doing that.
That's all right.
Really grateful. Dave, I'm hoping that you'll come back next week, if I can.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd like to talk about something else, I'd be over the moon. Yeah.
And I just wonder if there are some. So if we can get Dave Burke back here 7:30 next Monday, what items of kind of mental health, or perhaps better put, well-being, I know that's a word you kind of like, would you like us to talk about? So you jot some things down in the comments and let us know if there's anything in particular, and I'll chat with Dave and we'll come up with something and just publicize that. So that would be great. Dave, thank you so much for that.
It's been a pleasure, and I'm so sad I can't see you, Knighton folks, because it's been a long time, but who knows? Maybe maybe we'll meet again.
Well, I'll tell you what, when all this lockdown's lifted and we can actually see each other in person, let's get you down from Sunderland maybe for a weekend and do some stuff.
That'd be
Dave,
fantastic.
if I've been listening to this and want to do that kind of mental health first aid course, how can I do that?
Okay, this would be a mental health awareness course. It's a 4-hour introduction, really helpful, really practical. And the best thing to do would be on my Twitter feed. It's got a little plug on my Twitter feed. But if you go to my website, daveburketraining.com, and just send me a message, I'll send you the details.
Great.
Or you could look for it on Eventbrite. But I can send you the link if you just quickly email me or text or Facebook message. Yeah.
Great stuff.
Okay.
Thank you. That would be lovely. Thanks for joining us tonight, whoever you are. I mean, how have you got here? Somebody invited you, perhaps. It's been great having you here. I hope you found this as helpful as I have. I want to invite you back to something we haven't really. It's been a coronavirus-free time tonight, Dave. Congratulations on that. That was great. We're going to do the reverse on Friday night. Another friend of mine, Michael Otts, you know him, Dave, you've been working with recently, is going to talk to us. It won't be live, it's going to be a recording, but I'm going to have a bit of a panel afterwards so we can chat it over. Here's the title: How can there be a coronavirus if there's a loving God?
All right, he can't avoid it then.
So he will have to talk about that. 7:30 Friday on this channel. How can there be a coronavirus if there's a loving God? Do come back to that. Is that a Dalmatian?
That is a Dalmatian, and she needs to go out, so I'm going to have to go.
Dave, we're going to let you go. We're going to say good night anyway. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.